8 men walked into that diner, expecting to grab a little girl and be gone in under 4 minutes. They had weapons, they had training, they had a plan. What they didn't have, what nobody in that parking lot could have possibly known, was that the quiet man sits in the corner booth, the one in the dusty work boots and the faded flannel shirt, yet intervened, the one cutting a burger in half so his 9-year-old daughter could eat the smaller piece. First, that man was the most dangerous person in the room. By the time the police arrived, 6 of those 8 men were on the floor. If you're new here, subscribe now and stay until the end. Drop your city and country in the comments so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button and let's begin. The diner was called Patty's, which told you everything and nothing at the same time. It sat on Route 9 between 2 towns that nobody had ever heard of, anchored to a gravel lot, something that had been dropped there decades ago and simply never moved. The sign out front had lost the apostrophe sometime around 2009. Half the neon in the window had burned out. The parking lot smelled like old asphalt and someone else's cigarette break. Inside, it was the kind of place where the menus were laminated and sticky at the corners, where the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs that had been washed 10,000 times, and where the overhead lighting gave everyone the same slightly tired, slightly yellowish look, regardless of how rested they actually were. Evan Mercer loved it unreasonably. He couldn't have explained why, exactly. Maybe because nobody here knew him. Maybe because the waitress, a heavy-set woman named Deb, who had worked Thursdays for what appeared to be the last 40 years, always brought Sophie's chocolate milkshake in a metal mixing cup with the extra still in it, without being asked. Maybe because the booths were deep enough that you could disappear into one and the world had to work a little harder to find you. It was the thing about Evan. He had spent 6 years making the world work harder to find him. Sophie was 9 years old and currently winning an argument with a French fry. The fry had gone cold, and she had taken a philosophical position against eating cold fries, but she was also hungry, and these two realities were at war with each other in a way that she was narrating out loud. "It's not that I can't eat it," she said, examining the fry with the solemn attention of a junior scientist. "It's that it's not really a fry anymore. It's just a potato thing." "Been a potato thing for approximately 4 minutes, Evan said. "You were fine with it 4 minutes ago. 4 minutes is a long time. In fry years, maybe." She looked at him. He had eyes as a gray that shifted toward green depending on the light and her mother's ability to make those eyes say about 14 different things simultaneously. "You're not funny. I'm a little funny. You're a construction worker funny. That's different." He didn't ask what that meant because he suspected he already knew, and also because she was right. Picked up his coffee, also cold now, but he didn't care about that and looked out the window. 9 was quiet. One pickup going north, a minivan with a cracked taillight. The lot had a few cars in it, nothing unusual. The diner itself had maybe a dozen customers, a couple in their 60s sharing a piece of pie, 2 teenagers on what appeared to be a first date, and both suffering through it, a trucker at the counter, reading something on his phone. Evan noticed all of this, without appearing to notice any of it. Was another thing about him. He had never quite been able to turn that part off. The woman and the little girl came in at 6:47. Yes, he noticed them the way he noticed them automatically, without drama. The woman was in her late 30s, professionally dressed, but with her jacket over her arm, like she'd been wearing it all day, and was done with it. Dark hair pulled back, the kind of face that was probably very composed most of the time, and was currently working to stay that way. She was tired, not regular tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time and getting very good at not letting anyone see the weight. The little girl was 7, maybe 7.5. Brown pigtails, a yellow jacket that she clearly did not want to take off, despite the fact that it wasn't raining and hadn't rained in 4 days. She was chattering about something. Evan caught the word hamster twice, and the woman was listening with what looked like genuine attention, despite the fact that her mind was clearly doing 3 other things. Took the booth 2 spots from Sophie. Evan looked back at his coffee. "She has a cool jacket," Sophie said, watching the little girl without any attempt at subtlety. Stare. I'm not staring. I'm observing. What's the difference? Staring is rude. Observing is just noticing things. She turned back to her milkshake. Observe stuff all the time. He let that one go. Materialized at the new booth with her notepad and her Thursday expression, which was more generous than her Monday expression by a considerable margin. The little girl in the yellow jacket immediately informed Deb that she wanted pancakes. And when Deb gently explained that they were in dinner hours and pancakes were more of a morning situation, the little girl said, "What if I said please?" And Deb said she would see what she could do. Beside him, Sophie watched this negotiation with deep professional interest. She asked for pancakes at dinner, Sophie said. I heard. Does that work? Apparently it might. Sophie considered this. I want to try that sometime. You can try it. I can also say no. You'd say no to pancakes? I'd say no to the negotiation, Evan said. There's a difference. Sophie nodded slowly, filing this away. She filed away a lot of things. She was going to be exhausting when she was a teenager, and he tried not to think about that. He looked out the window again. Nothing had changed. The lot was still quiet. Route 9 was still just Route 9. Couple with the pie were arguing pleasantly about something. Teenagers had found some common ground. One of them had made the other laugh, a genuine laugh, and the tension between them was loosening into something easier. Evan almost let himself relax. It was the sound that hit him first. 3 engines, out in the lot, not passing through stopping. And they stopped almost simultaneously, within maybe 4 seconds of each other, in a way that wasn't how people parked when they were just coming in for pie. He was out of the booth before he understood why. Sophie looked up. Dad, stay here. He said it quietly, without alarm in his voice, because alarm was the last thing he wanted right now. Move from this booth. If I'm not back in 2 minutes. 2 minutes? Where are... Sophie, he met her eyes. Trust me. 2 minutes. She went still. She had learned over 9 years to read the difference between her father's worried face and his other face. He'd intervened. She didn't fully understand the other face, but she understood that when it appeared, she listened. He walked to the window at an angle, keeping back him from the glass. The lot had 3 new vehicles in it. A dark SUV near the entrance, positioned to block exit. Panel van on the south side, engine still ticking as it cooled. Pickup parked perpendicular to the building in a way that made no sense for someone who just wanted dinner. Had gotten out yet. They were waiting for something. A signal or a count. Evan turned from the window. He intervened. He crossed the diner in 8 steps and stopped beside the booth where the woman and the little girl were sitting. The woman looked up sharply. Her hand moved instinctively toward the little girl's arm. Kept his voice low and completely level. I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Evan. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. She stared at him. Her eyes were brown and very alert and were currently calculating about 6 things at once. Is there any reason, he said, that someone might want to take your daughter tonight? Color left her face. Not gradually. All at once, like something had pulled the drain. She didn't say anything. Okay, Evan said. We need to move. Right now. Don't make it look like we're hurrying. Can you do that? Who are you? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm a construction foreman from Millhaven, and I used to be something else, and right now that's going to matter a lot more than the construction part. He glanced at the little girl in the yellow jacket, who was watching him with wide, serious eyes. What's her name? Maisie. Hi, Maisie, he said. I'm a friend of your mom's. We're going to go see the kitchen. You ever seen the inside of a diner kitchen before? Maisie shook her head. It's pretty cool, he said. Big griddles. Very shiny. He straightened up and walked back to Sophie's booth. Change of plans, he said, keeping his voice easy, like he was announcing they might try a different movie. We're going to hang out in the kitchen for a little bit. Kitchen's more fun anyway. Sophie looked at him. Then she looked at Maisie's mother, who was now standing beside her daughter's booth with her jacket clutched in one hand and her phone in the other. Then she looked back at her father. How bad? Sophie asked. For a second he had no idea how to answer that. His 9-year-old daughter had just asked him how bad and says it, The way an adult says it, already prepared for the answer not to be good. No yet, he said. That was the honest answer. We're going to be fine. She nodded. She believed if he deserved that or not. He got them into the kitchen in under 90 seconds. Cook, a big guy named Ray, who had a tattoo of a bass fish on his forearm and was currently doing nothing wrong, looked up from the grill with the expression of a man whose Thursday was going sideways. I need your walk-in cooler, Evan said. My what? Your walk-in. Does the pantry lock from the inside? Ray blinked. Yeah, it's got a handle latch, but what the hell is? There are men in the parking lot who are about to come in here, and they are not here to eat. He said it simply. No elevation in his voice. No drama. Just the plain shape of the situation. I need every person who isn't going to fight to be behind a locked door. Can you help me do that? Ray looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Evan would decide later. Was a man who took the measure of things quickly and accurately. He set down his spatula. Yeah, Ray said, I can do that. Getting the other customers back without starting a stampede took 4 minutes and cost Evan something he couldn't quite name. He worked with Deb, who was, it turned out, constitutionally incapable of panic, and responded to the situation with the calm efficiency of someone who had outlasted many worse Thursdays, and between them they moved the couple with the pie, the trucker, the teenagers, just 2 women who'd been sharing an appetizer, an old man who had been in the bathroom and was confused about why everyone was now in the kitchen. Teenagers wanted to know what was happening, and Evan told them the gas line needed to be checked, which was not convincing, and both of them knew it. But they went anyway, because Deb touched the girl's shoulder and said, Honey, please, and some things still work. Camille, he'd caught her name when she said it to Maisie, trying to keep the little girl calm, had her phone out and was making a call. Her hands were shaking slightly, just slightly. She caught him noticing and didn't look away. I'm calling my security director, she said. There was something in her voice that wasn't quite an apology, and wasn't quite a justification. Just information. Good. Tell them we need police here now. 9. Patty's Diner, Millhaven Town Line. I know the address. You do, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. What are you going to do? He didn't answer that directly. Crouched down instead, to where Sophie and Maisie were standing together just inside the pantry doorway. Maisie still had her yellow jacket on. Sophie had her phone, and she had quietly, without being asked, pulled up a game on it and tilted the screen so Maisie could see. Was his kid. He couldn't do anything about the thing climbing up the back of his throat when he looked at her. I need you both to go in there, he said, gesturing to the pantry, a good-sized room, solid shelving, a reinforced door. I need you to pull the latch. I need you to not open it until you hear me or your mom knock 3 times and then twice. Can you remember that? 3 and then 2, Sophie said. 3 and then 2. No matter what you hear outside, you wait for that knock. He looked at Maisie. You're going to be okay. I promise you. Maisie's lower lip was doing something complicated. She reached out and grabbed a fistful of his flannel sleeve, the way kids do when they're scared, and are trying very hard not to say so. You smell like sawdust, she said. He wasn't expecting that. I was building something today, he said. What were you building? A back porch. He looked at her small hand on his sleeve. For a family that wanted somewhere to sit outside and watch their kids play. Maisie thought about this. She let go of his sleeve. Okay, she said, small voice. Enormous trust. He stood up. He looked at Sophie one more time. She was watching him with those gray-green eyes, and her jaw was set in a line that looked exactly like a line he knew from a different face, a face he hadn't been able to look at directly in years because of what it cost him. 3 and 2, she said. 3 and 2, he confirmed. He pulled the pantry door shut. He heard the latch engage from the inside. He turned back to the kitchen. Camille was standing 6 feet away, her phone now at her side. Ray was near the wall. Deb was there, too, arms crossed, watching Evan with an expression that was impossible to read. You two should go in the cooler, Evan said. Not a chance, Deb said. I've worked this diner for 19 years. but he tells me to go stand in the cooler. He started to argue and stopped, because there wasn't time, and also because Deb had a look on her face that suggested this particular argument was already over. He looked at Ray. Ray shrugged. She's the boss. He looked at Camille. Go in the cooler, he said. They're after my daughter, she said. I'm not hiding. They're after your daughter because of you. You going out there makes her less safe, not more. He held her gaze. Police are coming. I need 4 minutes. Help Deb keep everyone in this kitchen. And don't come through those doors no matter what you hear. Can you do that? Something moved across Camille's face. Something complicated and furious and cornered. I don't even know who you are, she said. He said. He picked up the only thing close to a weapon he'd been able to identify. In the last 4 minutes, a cast-iron skillet, about 12 inches, hanging from a hook above the prep station, and he walked through the kitchen doors back into the dining room. The first man came in before the door had finished swinging. He was big, tactical vest, gloved hands, moving like someone who had done this before. His head went left first, scanning, then found Evan standing in the middle of the room beside a booth, holding a skillet, and stopped. There was a pause, not a long pause, maybe 2 seconds. But Evan had been waiting for that pause. He had been waiting for the moment when a man looks at a construction worker holding a cast iron pan and has to reorganize everything he expected to find. Hey, Evan said. The man reached for something at his hip. Evan was already moving. He didn't think during it. That was the part he could never explain afterward. The part that lived somewhere below language, the way the body remembered things the mind had tried to put down. He crossed the space between them before the draw cleared the holster. It was close quarters and geometry and leverage, and the specific, ugly, unglamorous work of making another person unable to continue. The man went down. Evan stepped over him and caught the door as the second man came through it. Was outnumbered 8-1 in a diner with a skillet and a set of instincts he'd spent 6 years pretending he didn't have anymore. The funny thing, if anything about it was funny, was that the diner helped. It was narrow. The aisles between booths were tight. The counter ran along one side and created a channel that funneled movement in exactly one direction. The stools were bolted to the floor, but they were also the right height to catch a man's shin if you put one into the channel at the right moment. The booths were solid old construction, real wood, and if you got the right angle on one, you could use the momentum of a larger man against him in a way that ended the encounter in approximately 3 seconds. Evan knew these things, the way he knew how to frame a wall or read a load-bearing beam. From training, yes, but also from something worse, from memory. From the particular knowledge that comes from having actually had to do this in places he no longer let himself think about, by name. He did not do it cleanly. He caught a fist across left side of his jaw on the fourth man, hard enough to send sparks across his vision. He went to a booth and had to scramble to keep the fifth man from getting a good angle on him while his ears were still ringing. He bled from somewhere above his eyebrow. He didn't know when that started. But he kept moving, because stopping was not something he was willing to do with 2 little girls behind a latched pantry door. By the time the sirens reached Route 9, the diner was very quiet. Evan was sitting in a booth. His skillet was on the table in front of him. His hands were on the table too, flat, and he was looking at them the way a man looks at something that surprises him about himself. 6 men were on the floor in various configurations. 2 had left through the front door at a run, approximately 90 seconds before the police arrived. Evan had let them go, because at that point he'd been calculating whether he could physically close the remaining distance without something going wrong, and the math hadn't worked in his favor. Kitchen doors opened. Deb came out first. She looked at the room. She looked at Evan. She set her hands on her hips and took a breath. "I'm going to need to make some calls," she said. Then Camille came through the doors. She stopped in the entrance to the kitchen and took in the room and the stillness of it, and then found Evan in the booth. She looked at him for a long moment. Her face did several things he didn't try to track. "They're okay?" he asked. She nodded. "They're okay." He looked back at his hands. The knuckles on his right hand had split, and were already darkening. Cut above his eye was doing something he'd need to deal with eventually. "I need to let Sophie out," he said. "Yes," Camille said. He stood up. His left knee protested more than he expected. He'd hit the edge of a booth stool at some point and hadn't fully registered it in the moment, and now it had opinions about the whole situation that it wanted to share. He was 32 years old, and he felt significantly older than that as he crossed the diner and pushed open the kitchen door. No. He went to the pantry. He knocked 3 times. Pause. Then twice, a beat of silence. The latch opened. Sophie stood in the doorway, holding Maisie's hand. Maisie's yellow jacket was still on. Sophie's face had gone very still in the way it went still when she was scared, and was refusing to be scared, a face he recognized because he'd taught himself to make the same face for much the same reason. Crouched down. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms, and Sophie walked into them and pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed out one long, shaky exhale like she'd been holding her breath for the last 10 minutes. Maisie stood in the pantry doorway watching them. Then she walked over and stood beside Sophie, and she put one small hand on Sophie's back, patting it, once, twice the way a 7-year-old does when she wants to help but doesn't quite know what helping looks like yet. Looked at that small hand. He looked at it for a long time. Outside on Route 9, the first police cruiser pulled into the lot, its lights painting the diner windows red and blue and red and blue. A radio crackled. Voices. The sound of doors opening. The world, which had briefly narrowed to a diner and a skillet and 8 men, began expanding again. Evan held his daughter and let it expand. He was bleeding on his shirt. His knee hurt. His jaw was going to be interesting in the morning. Somewhere in the dining room, Deb was probably already making coffee, because she was that kind of woman. Sophie pulled back eventually and looked at him. "You're bleeding," she said. "Did you win?" He thought about that. About what winning meant in a diner on Route 9 on a Thursday evening when all he'd wanted was a burger and a milkshake and a booth where the world had to work a little harder to find him. "Yeah," he said. "We're okay. That's winning." Sophie reached up and touched the cut above his eye with 2 fingers, gentle, the way he'd done to her 100 times with skinned knees and busted lips. "Okay," she said, like she was closing a file. "Okay." He stood up to... He put one hand on her shoulder and one on Maisie's, and he walked them out of the pantry and through the kitchen and into a diner that was now full of flashing lights and uniforms and the complicated, grinding machinery of what happened next. He wasn't ready for any of it. He walked into it anyway. Cut above his eye needed 4 stitches. He sat on the back bumper of an ambulance while a paramedic whose name tag said Torres worked on it with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times and was not particularly moved by the circumstances. Evan held still. He'd had worse done in worse places with worse lighting, and nobody had offered him an ambulance afterward, so he considered this a significant upgrade. Across the parking lot, 2 state police cruisers and a county sheriff's vehicle had positioned themselves in a loose perimeter. 4 of the 6 men from the diner floor were being loaded into separate vehicles, with their hands zip-tied behind them. The other 2 had needed stretchers. Evan had heard one of the paramedics say bilateral fracture and felt something he couldn't entirely categorize, not pride, not shame, something that sat uncomfortably between the 2. Sophie was inside a second ambulance, getting checked out. Standard protocol, the responding officer had explained with the particular apologetic tone people use when they're telling you something you don't get a vote on. She hadn't been touched. Evan knew that. But he also understood that him knowing it and a medical professional confirming it were 2 different things, and he let them do their job because his daughter deserved every version of okay available. Maisie was with Camille near the diner entrance. The little girl had finally taken off the yellow jacket and was now wearing it over her shoulders like a cape, which seemed like a reasonable response to the evening. "This going to scar?" Evan asked Torres. Torres examined the stitchwork. "Bit. Depends how you heal." "Okay. You want something for the pain?" Torres gave him the look medical people give when a patient declines pain management, not quite disapproval, not quite somewhere in between. Suit yourself. Keep it clean. Change the bandage tomorrow morning. Torres packed up his kit and moved on, and Evan was left sitting on the bumper, watching a parking lot full of consequence. The federal agent arrived at 8:43. Evan knew he was federal before the man had walked 10 steps from his car, because there was a specific way federal people carried themselves in situations like this, a combination of authority and containment, like they were managing the volume of a room they'd walked into. This one was mid-40s, gray at the temples, wearing a jacket that was too good for rural Massachusetts and shoes that were impractical for a gravel lot, but probably looked excellent in an office. He walked directly to Evan. Mr. Mercer. Not a question. Special Agent Daniel Holt, Organized Crime and National Security. Can we talk? Evan looked at him. You got here fast. We were already aware of the situation. Were you? Evan said it flat. Quite a question either. Holt sat down the bumper beside him without being invited, which Evan noted. Camille Westbrook has a federal security liaison through a contract her company holds with the DoD. When her director made the call, it came to us. He paused. The situation in the diner came to us too, and then you came to us. Evan said nothing. Evan Thomas Mercer, Holt said. 32, Millhaven, Massachusetts. Construction foreman, licensed contractor, single father. Another pause. And then there's a gap. People have gaps. Not like yours. Holt pulled out a phone, looked at something on the screen, put it away. The men inside the four that are talking, they all have the same story. They came in ready to take down a security detail. What they found instead was one guy. He looked at Evan sideways. One guy with a skillet. I was improvising, I can see that. A dry note in Holt's voice. Unfriendly. He broke 3 noses, 2 ribs, 1 wrist, and 1 orbital socket. That's before accounting for the concussions. They started it. That is technically and legally accurate, Holt agreed. He let a moment pass. I'm not here to cause you problems, Mr. Mercer. I'm here because we have a situation that just escalated significantly, and I need to understand who you are before I can figure out how to proceed. Evan watched a cruiser pull out of the lot. I am a construction foreman from Millhaven. Sure, Holt said. And the other thing? The other thing. 6 years of careful quiet, early mornings with Sophie's cereal and school drop-offs, and weekend job sites, and deliberate, constructed normalcy. Federal agent was sitting on a bumper at Patty's Diner, calling it the other thing, like it was a minor biographical footnote. Ancient history, Evan said. What happened tonight says otherwise. What happened tonight was 8 people made a mistake about who was in the room. He looked at Holt directly. I'm not interested in being recruited, consulted, or debriefed. I've got a 9-year-old daughter inside that ambulance who had a very bad Thursday, and I'd like to take her home. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the organization that sent those men tonight. What they were after?
Camille Westbrook's daughter.
You know why? I can make a reasonable guess. Leverage, Holt said. Sits. Ms. Westbrook's company is finalizing a navigation system so all parties would like access to without going through legal channels. Her daughter is the most direct path to her cooperation. He paused. This was not their first attempt. It was just their first failure. Absorbed that. The parking lot smelled like gravel and exhaust and the faint chemical bite of something medical from the open ambulance doors. Try again, Evan said. Almost certainly. You need to do your job better. Holt smiled slightly. It didn't entirely reach his eyes. We're working on that. The challenge is that the organization behind this, we're calling them Aegis Black. That's our designation is sophisticated. They don't hire amateurs. The 8 men tonight were professionals, Mr. Mercer, whatever you think about how it went. Evan thought about the man who'd caught him across the jaw. He'd been good. Not great, but good. I know what they were. Which makes what you did considerably more. I'd like to check on my daughter now. Holt stopped, took a breath. Of course. He stood up, straightened his jacket. I'm going to need to speak with you again. Formally, preferably, tomorrow. There's information you have that could be useful. I'm not useful, Evan said. I'm a construction foreman. Whatever you need to be tonight, Holt said. And the way he said it didn't sound like an argument. It sounded like an observation. He handed Evan a card-thick paper. Government seal, direct number handwritten on the back. Get some rest. Keep your phone on. He walked back toward his car, shoes entirely wrong for gravel, not seeming to care. Sophie was fine. She was sitting on the edge of the ambulance bench eating a granola bar that one of the paramedics had produced from somewhere, which struck Evan as a very Sophie response to a crisis. She looked at him when he climbed in, looked at the stitches, looked at his split knuckles, looked at his face, and did a full inventory the way she always did, her eyes moving quickly and systematically before arriving at whatever conclusion she'd come to. 4 stitches? She said. 4, does it hurt? A little. Torres said you told him you didn't want anything for the pain. Torres has opinions, Evan said. Torres is right. She broke off a piece of granola bar and held it out to him. Took it even though he wasn't hungry, because that was what you did when your kid offered you something after a hard night. They sat in the ambulance for a while. The paramedic gave them space, stepping outside and finding something to attend to. Outside, the parking lot was still busy with uniforms and vehicles, and the procedural machinery of aftermath. Dad, Sophie said, yeah, those men. Were they going to hurt Maisie? He thought about how to answer that. He had a policy had held to it for 9 years of not lying to his daughter about hard things. Catastrophizing, not over-explaining, but not dressing things up in soft language that collapsed under the weight of a follow-up question. They wanted to take her, he said, to scare her mom into doing something she didn't want to do. Sophie chewed on that alongside the granola bar. That's really awful. It is. Did they know Maisie was 7? I don't think it mattered to them. Pause. Outside, a radio crackled. Sophie looked at her hands, then at him. She held my hand the whole time. In the pantry. She didn't cry, but she was shaking a little. Turned the phone game up loud so she could hear it better. He looked at his daughter. She was 9 years old, and she had sat in a locked pantry with a terrified 7-year-old stranger and turned the sound up on a phone game to give her something to focus on. It was good thinking, he said. I didn't know what else to do. It was exactly the right thing to do. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him. You did good tonight, Soph. She was quiet for a moment. Then so did you. He didn't say anything to that. They didn't get home until almost midnight. Camille had spoken to Evan once more. Before they'd left the lot, a brief exchange near the diner entrance. Both of them standing in the residual glow of police lights. Both of them running on empty. I need to ask you something, she said. Okay, what you did in there? She stopped. Started again. I've had security contractors, professional security, who are paid specifically to handle situations like this. She looked at him steadily. Them could have done what you did. So I want to know, and I'm asking directly, because I don't have the patience for anything else right now. Who are you? I told Agent Holt. I'm not Agent Holt. Her voice was level. She wasn't angry, exactly. She was the way people get when they've been frightened badly, and the fears curdled into something that needs an answer to attach itself to. I was 30 feet away. I heard those men come in. I heard what happened, and then it was over, and you came and knocked 3 times and then twice, and my daughter was safe. Her jaw tightened slightly. Who are you? He could have deflected again. He'd been doing it all night. But she'd asked directly, the way she'd said she would. And something about standing in a parking lot at 11:30 with stitches above his eye and a daughter waiting in a truck made the deflection feel like more work than it was worth. Was special operations, he said, for a long time. I left 6 years ago when my wife died. I came here. I got a contractor's license. I'd built a house, raised my daughter. He's held her gaze. That's the whole thing. She was quiet. The police lights had mostly gone now, leaving the lot in the irregular yellow of the overhead sodium lamps. Your wife, she said. Not a question, just repeating it back, carefully, the way people do when they want you to know they heard it. I'm sorry, thank you. Another silence. Maisie appeared in the diner doorway and leaned against the frame, watching them with the particular tired observation of a 7-year-old who had exceeded her capacity for the day by several hours. Maisie said, "I want to go home." "I know, baby." Camille looked at Evan. "For my daughter." For she stopped. "Thank you." He nodded. She went back to Maisie, and that was the end of it. Except it wasn't. He knew that, and she probably did too. Holt came to Evan's house the next morning at 9. Evan had been up since 5:30. Sophie was still asleep, which was unusual for her, but understandable given everything. And he'd sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the particular thoughts that come at 5:30 in the morning when there's no construction noise to drown them out. He let Holt in, did not offer coffee. They sat at the kitchen table. Holt opened a folder. Aegis Black. "We've been tracking this organization for about 14 months. They're not a government entity, private, well-funded, sophisticated operational capacity. They've executed at least 4 similar operations in Europe over the past 3 years. Leverage operations, targeting families to compel cooperation from tech executives or defense contractors. Always children, spouses, parents, children, whoever is most accessible." Holt's voice was neutral. "Professional. Camille Westbrook's company, Westbrook Defense Systems, is in the final phase of development on a navigational guidance system contracted by the Department of Defense. The technology has a classified application we're not going to discuss in detail, but you can reason through the implications. Someone wants the technology without paying for it the regular way, without the restrictions that come with licensed acquisition." Holt flipped a page. "What I need from you, Mr. Mercer, is your read on the operational structure of what happened last night. The men you engaged, their coordination, their sequencing, how they positioned the vehicles. We have physical evidence and the statements from the ones in custody, but we're missing interpretive context that someone with your background can provide." Evan turned his coffee mug in a slow circle. "What do you have so far?" 3-vehicle approach. Vehicles were timed to arrive within a narrow window. We're estimating a 4-second spread on engine shutoff, which suggests rehearsal. Holt looked up. "That's the part that bothers me. They rehearsed the arrival, which means they knew in advance where Ms. Westbrook would be. She was followed," Evan said. "That's our conclusion." "For how long?" Holt hesitated. "At least 2 weeks. Possibly 4. Evan absorbed that. 2 weeks of someone watching Camille Westbrook's patterns. Her routines. Which evenings she took her daughter out. Which diner she preferred when she needed somewhere ordinary and unobserved. And wasn't that an ugly thing that her attempt to have one unremarkable evening had become the evening they'd chosen? 2 that ran," Evan said. "They were the primary team leaders. The ones I engaged, first they were entry and containment. The 2 that ran were going to manage the extraction. That's consistent with what we recovered from their communications. Which means someone called off the extraction when it went sideways. There was a controller outside, not one of the 8. Holt's pen stopped moving on his notepad. He looked up slowly. "We did not identify a 9th individual. You won't find him in the lot. He was probably a block or 2 away, watching the approach, feeding timing signals. When the first men didn't come out on schedule, he pulled the extraction team." Evan set down his coffee. "Your 2 missing men didn't run. They were ordered out." Holt was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he wrote something on his notepad. "That's useful. That's obvious," Evan said. "Not unkindly. Just accurate. Not everyone sees it." "Train better people," Evan said. Holt made a sound that might have been a laugh. Very small, quickly contained. "Going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "I'll answer honestly. I won't necessarily answer fully." Holt put his pen down. "Are you willing to consult?" "Informally. Contractor arrangement. Not a reinstatement of anything you held previously. Just your eyes on what we find as we build this case." Evan looked at the kitchen table. Sophie had left a drawing there from yesterday before all of this, a bird with improbably large wings, and the word condor written below it in capital letters because she'd been reading about them in school. He looked at it for a moment. "My daughter isn't part of this," he said. "Understood. I mean that specifically. Nothing comes near her. Nothing gets discussed where she can hear it. If I'm in a briefing, she's somewhere else. If there's risk that connects back to this address, you're responsible for managing it. Agreed. And I'm not going back to what I was, he said. I'll look at what you bring me. I'll tell you what I see. But I'm not running operations. I'm not carrying a weapon on behalf of the federal government. And when this is finished, I go back to building back porches. Holt considered this for a moment. That seems like a reasonable arrangement. The only arrangement. Holt picked up his pen again. There's one more thing. Ms. Westbrook wants to speak with you. Today, if possible. Evan thought about Camille in the parking lot. Who are you? Said straight. No performance in it. He'd respected that. Set it up, he said. They met at a nondescript conference room in a federal building in Worcester, which was about as glamorous as it sounded. Camille arrived with her security director, a compact woman named Patrice, who had the watchful stillness of someone whose job was specifically to notice things, and a lawyer, because Camille Westbrook was not a woman who walked into rooms unprepared, even rooms arranged by federal agents the morning after someone tried to steal her daughter. She looked better than she had at 11:30 in the parking lot, which was a low bar, but she also looked like she'd slept about 2 hours and had covered the evidence of that with a professionalism that had its own kind of exhaustion underneath it. She sat down across from Evan and looked at him directly, the way she'd looked at him in the lot. I did some research, she said. I figured you might. Public record is thin. I know. The gap is very specifically shaped, she said. Thin records have a certain look when they're just thin. No. Your gap has a different look. She folded her hands on the table. Her lawyer was making notes on a legal pad. Patrice was watching the door. My security director used to work in a certain area of government that I'm not going to name, and she told me that the gap in your record has a shape she's seen twice before in her career. Evan looked at Patrice. Patrice met his gaze without expression. I'm not asking you to confirm or discuss the details, Camille continued. I'm asking you something different. She paused, and he could see her choosing the words carefully, minimal, arranging them for accuracy rather than impact. Agent Holt wants to work this investigation a certain way. He wants to gather evidence, build a case, go through the proper channels. And maybe he's right. He probably is. She stopped again. But I have a 7-year-old daughter who slept in my bed last night with every light in the room on, and she woke up 3 times, and I don't know how long it's going to take Agent Holt's proper channels to make her safe again. So I want to know what you think, not what you think about the investigation. What you think about the threat. The room was quiet. The lawyer kept writing on his legal pad, which Evan found mildly bizarre, given that Evan hadn't said anything yet. I think they'll try again, he said. Not immediately. They lost people last night, and they need to reorganize. And whoever is running this is going to want to understand what went wrong before they try a second approach. He looked at Camille steadily. That gives you a window. It's not a long window, but it's real. How weeks? Maybe 4, maybe 6. Depends on their structure and their resources. He leaned forward slightly. What they're going to look for next time is a different access point. Last night was a direct approach, take Maisie in a public location, controlled environment, overwhelming numbers. That failed. So now they look for a different angle, which is someone inside, he said. Someone who doesn't have to get through any perimeter at all because they're already inside it. Camille's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did a slight tightening, like she'd just felt a temperature drop in a room. You're saying there's an insider. I'm saying that's what I would look for in their position. The direct approach failed. The next logical step is compromised access. He paused. Your daily schedule. Multiple people. Who knew you were going to be at that diner last night? Question landed in the room, like something dropped from a height. Looked at her lawyer, then at Patrice, then back at Evan. I didn't tell anyone, she said. I decided at 4 in the afternoon. I was tired. I wanted to take Maisie somewhere normal. Told my assistant I was leaving the office early, and not to schedule anything, but I didn't say where I was going. Your phone? A pause. Longer than the previous pauses. Patrice, Camille said quietly. I'll have it checked today, Patrice said. Her voice was flat and completely controlled, and Evan could see she was furious about the implication, not at Camille, but at herself at the possibility that it had already happened, and she hadn't seen it. It may be nothing, Evan said. They could have been tracking you physically for long enough to predict a pattern. It's worth checking. Camille nodded. She looked at the table for a moment, then back at him. I need to keep Maisie's movements unpredictable, she said. Visible security has the opposite effect. It draws attention. It confirms she's a target. It creates a pattern of its own. She hesitated. I had an idea. I want your honest reaction, even if it's negative. Maisie and Sophie seemed to get along, she said. The diner, and afterward she looked at him carefully. If Maisie spent time in your world, your actual life, ordinary places, school pickup, soccer practice, or whatever Sophie does, it's unpredictable. Watching Westbrook Defense Systems would to look at a construction foreman's Thursday afternoon. Evan was quiet. He was quiet for long enough that the lawyer stopped writing on his legal pad and looked up. You're asking me to let your daughter into my life, Evan said. Means you'd be in my life. Yes, Camille said. And what I'm asking. He thought about his house. Quiet he had built into it deliberately, painstakingly, board by board. Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator, the specific arrangement of a life designed to keep the world outside where it belongs, Sophie would have to know, he said finally. Not the details. But she'd have to understand that something was happening and that I needed her to be aware. She seems like a child who can handle that. She is, he said. Doesn't mean it's fair to ask her. No, Camille agreed. It isn't. She said it without apology, because they were past the point where apologies were the right currency. But it might be what keeps Maisie safe while Holt's people build their case. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them was pretending this was a simple thing. I'll think about it, he said. That's fair. He drove home through central Massachusetts in the afternoon light, with the windows down and the radio off, and his jaw still tender on the left side and 4 stitches above his eye. And he thought about what it meant to open a door that he had spent 6 years making sure stayed shut. He didn't have an answer by the time he pulled into the driveway. He found Sophie sitting on the front steps with a book in her lap and her sneakers untied, and when she looked up at him, he saw something on her face that he hadn't seen there in a long time. She looked like she was waiting for something, not afraid. Just waiting. He sat down beside her on the steps. The afternoon was warm and still. A neighbor's lawnmower started up somewhere down the street and then stopped again. How was your morning? He asked. Quiet, she said. She paused. Weird quiet, like the house was listening. He understood that. Yeah, Dad, she closed her book, keeping her finger in the page. Are we done with it? With what happened last night? He looked at the yard. The grass needed cutting. There was a loose board on the porch rail he'd been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. The ordinary persistence of a house that needed tending. He said, We're probably not. Sophie was quiet. Then she nodded once slowly, like she'd already decided how she felt about that answer, and was simply confirming it matched what he'd said. Okay, she said. Then I think Maisie should come over sometime. He looked at her. She was scared, Sophie said simply. And she was brave about it. That's the kind of person you help. He sat on the steps for a moment longer, looking at his daughter who was 9 years old and had already figured out the answer he'd been sitting with for 2 hours in the car. I think so too. Maisie came over for the first time on a Tuesday. It wasn't planned as anything significant. Camille had a meeting that ran long, something with her legal team about the DoD contract timeline, and Patrice had texted at 3:15 asking if Sophie's school pickup could extend to include Maisie just for the afternoon. Evan had been on a job site in Millhaven pouring a concrete footer when his phone buzzed. He read the message, looked at the half-poured form, told his crew chief to finish it, and drove to the elementary school. Maisie was waiting outside, with Sophie on the front steps. The two of them were arguing, pleasantly, about whether a hot dog was a sandwich. Sophie's position was that structural containment by bread, constituted the defining characteristic of a sandwich, and therefore, yes. Maisie's position was that hot dogs were hot dogs, and the sandwich question was irrelevant, and also weird. They were still arguing about it in the truck. They were arguing about it when he pulled into the driveway. He got them inside, got them snacks. Sophie had an apple and peanut butter. Yes, Maisie accepted the same arrangement and then ate around the apple skins with the focused commitment of someone who had opinions about texture, and then they disappeared into Sophie's room, and he heard the low murmur of children doing whatever children do in rooms when adults aren't watching. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. He hadn't had another child in this house since Sarah Sek died. He hadn't had much of anyone in this house since Sarah died. He'd had his crew chief over once for beers when they finished a big job, and Evan's neighbor Frank came to borrow tools periodically. But those were transactions. This was different. This was a small person with a yellow jacket and opinions about hot dogs, using his daughter's bathroom and leaving her shoes in the middle of his hallway. He looked at the shoes for a moment. Small sneakers, purple, one of them on its side. Stepped around them and made coffee. That was the first Tuesday. There were others. Over the following 2 weeks, Maisie's appearances in Evan's house became irregular enough to be genuinely unpredictable, which was the point, and frequent enough that she stopped being a guest in any meaningful sense. She had a preferred spot on the couch. She had opinions cereal was acceptable, and which was not. She and Sophie developed a card game with rules so complex and apparently arbitrary that Evan had tried once to follow along and had given up after 6 minutes. Came with her sometimes. Sometimes Patrice dropped Maisie off alone. The arrangement had a shape to it that wasn't quite anything, not a formal security plan, a playdate schedule, exactly a friendship between the adults, but something that overlapped with all three and didn't fit cleanly into any of them. Evan wasn't sure how he felt about that. He spent some time not examining it too closely. Holt came by the house on a Thursday evening, 17 days after the diner. He had a folder and a laptop and the slightly compressed energy of a man who had found something and was managing his reaction to it. Evan let him in, checked that Sophie's bedroom door was closed. She and Maisie were inside, watching something on Sophie's tablet, and sat down at the kitchen table. Phone was clean, Holt said. Camille's phone. No spyware. No tracking software. Which means the diner wasn't a digital tale. Physical surveillance. Confirmed. We found a rental car registered to a shell company that shows up in 3 other Aegis Black operations. He'd been watching her for at least 3 weeks. He opened the folder. The vehicle was parked at varying distances from her office, her home, 2 restaurants she frequents. The driver rotated different people, same car, which is why Patrice's team didn't flag it. Evan looked at the photos in the folder. Surveillance images, captured from what appeared to be traffic and parking cameras, a dark sedan, different drivers, different positions, same patient watching. Professional work, patient work. They had resources, he said. Significant resources, which brings me to what I actually came to show you. Holt opened his laptop. On the screen was a financial diagram, nodes, and connecting lines, the visual language of money moving through structures designed to obscure its movement. We've been following Aegis Black's funding for 11 months. We thought we had a reasonable picture of it. Shell companies in 3 jurisdictions, cryptocurrency layering, a legitimate-looking private equity firm in Luxembourg that serves as the primary wash point. But Evan said, Holt turned the laptop slightly. Look at the structure, specifically at the Luxembourg entity. Evan looked. He'd seen financial flow diagrams before, in contexts he didn't think about anymore. He knew what they looked like when they were real, and what they looked like when they were meant to be found. He leaned forward. He looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Too clean, he said. Holt's expression shifted. Prize, exactly. More like confirmation. Say more. This Luxembourg structure, the layerings is sophisticated, but it's also comprehensible. If you follow the right nodes in the right order, it resolves into something traceable. He pointed at the screen without touching it. Real money laundering at this scale is designed to be fractal. You follow one thread and it leads to 6 more that lead to 12 more, and eventually you're so deep in subsidiary entities that meaningful reconstruction takes years. He straightened up. This resolves. It resolves in a way that looks like work, but isn't really. You were meant to find this. Holt closed the laptop slowly. We've had a financial crimes team on this for 3 months. No. And they found it, Evan said. Right? They found the Luxembourg connection. They traced it back through the shell companies. They identified the cryptocurrency layer. It felt like a breakthrough. Holt said nothing. It's a decoy layer, Evan said. You were given something that looks like the answer, which means the real funding source is somewhere else, in something so ordinary that you haven't thought to look at it. Kitchen was quiet. Down the hall, Sophie's tablet made a cartoon noise, and Maisie laughed a high, uncomplicated sound, and Evan registered it without looking away from Holt. We've been building our case around the wrong financial picture, Holt said. It wasn't a question. He said it the way a man says something when he's working through the implications and doesn't love where they're going. If I'm right, Evan said, I might not be right. You're right, Holt said, with a certainty that wasn't flattering to anyone in the room. He rubbed his face with one hand. We need to start over on the financial side. Wider look. Less assumption about what constitutes a legitimate entity. For something boring, Evan said. Real money hides in boring things. Infrastructure funds. Defense subcontractors that are 3 or 4 steps removed from anything sensitive. Pension vehicles. Things that don't attract attention because they're not designed to. Holt was writing. What else? Evan thought about the diagram. Potts had intervened about the shape of an organization that could construct a false financial trail sophisticated enough to occupy a federal team for 3 months. Whoever designed that decoy has real expertise, not just money laundering expertise. Operational experience with how federal financial investigations are run. He paused. You have a leak somewhere, adjacent to your financial crimes team. Necessarily inside it, but adjacent. Someone who knew enough about your investigative methodology to design a decoy that would satisfy it. Holt's pen stopped. I could be wrong about that, Evan said. You're not wrong about the other things, Holt said. Evan said, but that one I'd want more evidence before I said it out loud to anyone. Holt nodded slowly. He closed his folder. He looked at the table for a moment, then at Evan. I want to bring you into the full briefing. There are things I'm not authorized to share informally at a kitchen table. Told you before. I know what you told me. I'm asking you to reconsider the format, not the terms. Same terms. Different room. He paused. We're not building a case for next year, Mercer. They regroup on schedule. We have 3 weeks before the next attempt. Maybe 4. Evan looked at the closed bedroom door down the hall. 3 weeks. Maisie with her purple sneakers in his hallway, and her specific opinions about cereal. Sophie with her manufactured card game rules and the way she'd started setting an extra place at the table on the afternoons Maisie came over without being asked, as if it had always been the natural number of places to set. Set up the briefing, he said. The full briefing was at a facility outside Worcester that had no signage and a parking lot that seemed designed to be easily missed from the road. Evan drove himself. He'd told Sophie he had a meeting about a commercial project, and she'd said okay and gone back to her homework, which was either trust or disinterest, and he hoped it was the former. Camille was already in the conference room when he arrived. He hadn't expected that. He stopped in the doorway for a half-second before his face caught up with the situation. She looked at him with an expression that suggested she also hadn't been told he'd be here. They both looked at Holt. You're both involved in this, Holt said without apology. It made sense to brief you together. Next time, Camille said, tell us that before the room. Holt said, in a tone that suggested it was noted, and also that he'd probably do it again if the situation called for it. They sat down. Patrice was in the corner. 2 other agents Evan didn't know were against the wall. Projector threw a map onto the screen at the end of the table, Eastern United States, with several nodes marked in red. Holt stood at the front of the room. Aegis black. What we know and what we've revised in the past 72 hours, partly based on new analysis. He didn't look at Evan when he said new analysis, but the agents against the wall did, briefly. The organization operates as a fractured cell structure. The operational cells, the people who actually execute the fieldwork, have limited knowledge of anything above their immediate command layer. The men at the diner knew their target, their timeline, and their extraction point. They did not know who hired them or why, which means taking them down doesn't take down the organization, Camille said. Correct. The command structure is insulated. We've identified 3 intermediate layers, but above those layers we have a gap. He clicked to the next slide. Until 48 hours ago, we believed the organization's financial structure originated in Europe. We're revising that conclusion. He looked at the agents against the wall. We now believe the primary funding source is domestic, embedded in a legitimate defense industry network, and has been operational for over a decade. Evan watched the slide change. The new financial diagram on the screen was different from the one Holt had shown him at the kitchen table. Less elegant, more tangled, more real. We've identified a controlling interest, Holt said. We're not ready to name it formally yet, but the profile fits a specific category of actor. Former defense industry, significant capital, a grievance. A grievance, Camille said. Her voice was careful. Aegis Black isn't purely mercenary, Holt said. The operations are funded commercially, they take contracts, but the organization itself was built around a specific motivation. Someone with resources and a reason. Evan looked at the diagram on the screen, at the shape of it, at the particular way money moved when it was being directed by something other than pure profit. Someone who lost something, Evan said. Not money. Something they thought they were owed. Holt looked at him. That's the working hypothesis, which means when you find the financial source, you'll also find the motive, Camille said. She was connecting the pieces in real time, and Evan could see her doing it, the way her eyes moved while she was thinking, the slight tension in her jaw. And when you find the motive, you'll find the person. That's the theory, Holt said. How long? We're working on it. How long? She said again, with exactly the same inflection, because she had not asked for a status update. Holt met her gaze. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. We're pulling commercial records. We're running the revised financial model. And we have a forensic accounting team that is genuinely excellent at what they do. He paused. What I need from both of you is continued patience with the current protocol. Maisie keeps going to Millhaven, Camille said. The unpredictability is working. We're not seeing surveillance on Westbrook's residential address or the office that suggests an active planning phase yet. They're still in the reorganization window. He paused. We think that window is narrowing. After the briefing, Evan and Camille walked to the parking lot together, not by design, just the geography of 2 people leaving the same room. The afternoon was overcast, the kind of flat gray that made Massachusetts look its age. Former defense industry, Camille said. Not to him specifically. Working it out. You have someone in mind, Evan said. She was quiet for a moment. Maybe. There was a contract dispute. 4 years ago. A man named Gideon Rourke. He ran a defense technology consulting firm, very established, 30 years in the industry. He was a subcontractor on a guidance project my company worked on. She stopped walking. There was a technical failure. His systems were responsible. Officially. I reported it because I was contractually obligated to. He lost the DoD relationship. His company didn't survive the following year. He blamed you, Evan said. He told me personally when it ended that I would regret it. She said it matter-of-factly. With drama, just as information. I took it as what people say when they're angry and humiliated. I didn't take it as a threat. How long ago was that? 4 years. Evan thought about 4 years, about what a person could build in 4 years when they had resources and a reason and patience. Tell Holt I was going to. Today, he said. She looked at him. How urgency works, Mercer. He believed her. Sorry, she shook her head slightly. Not dismissal, more like don't bother. She looked at the gray sky for a moment. What I keep thinking about, she said, is that he attended an industry conference where Maisie came to a reception. She was 5. She drew a picture of a boat on a cocktail napkin, and he said it was very good. A pause. He knew her when she was 5. Evan didn't say anything. Yesens, there wasn't anything useful to say to that. People are capable of worse than I keep expecting them to be, Camille said. Not surprised. Just tired. Yeah, he said. They are. She looked at him for a moment. Then she got in her car and drove away, and he stood at the parking lot and thought about Gideon Rourke, who had smiled at a 5-year-old's napkin drawing and was now, 4 years later, running an organization that had sent 8 men to take her from a diner. Holt called him 2 days later at 7 in the morning. Rourke fits, Holt said without preamble. The financial profile, the timeline, the technical expertise to construct the decoy layer, all of it fits. We're pulling his full history now. Then you're close, Evan said. He was standing at the kitchen counter. Sophie was eating cereal behind him. He kept his voice flat and unremarkable. Close, Holt agreed. Rourke is careful. We need the financial thread to tie clean before we approach a warrant. Could be another week. He's going to move before then, Evan said. He's been patient for 4 years. He's not going to wait another 3 weeks. What makes you say that? Because the diner failed publicly, Evan said. People in that kind of operation, they don't manage failure privately. There are people above Rourke who want results. And Rourke needs to demonstrate he can deliver before his credibility in that network evaporates. He turned slightly, watching Sophie stir cereal without tasting it the way she did when she was thinking about something. He'll move to the inside access play. Soon. Within days, not weeks. A silence on Holt's end. The kind of silence that meant something was being decided. We've been looking at Westbrook's staff, Holt said carefully. There are some irregularities in the financial profile of one of her senior engineers. We haven't moved on it yet because we needed the broader picture. Evan felt the specific cold clarity of a prediction landing. I'm not going to do anything with a name, Holt. I just need to know if what I'm thinking is accurate. Silence. Then Kessler. Martin Kessler. Systems engineer, 4 years with the company. Evan walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped onto the porch where Sophie couldn't hear. The morning air was cool and damp. A cardinal was doing something in the maple tree at the edge of the yard. How much, he said. The payments we've identified total $240,000. Over approximately 8 months. He'd have access to the transfer credentials, Evan said. It wasn't a question. He would. Then that's your inside path. Rourke doesn't need to touch Maisie again. He just needs Kessler to initiate the technology transfer in a way that looks authorized. He paused. When he does, the trail reads like Camille approved it herself. Cardinal made a sharp sound and flew off. The yard was quiet. If we move on Kessler now, Holt said slowly, we tip Rourke that we're onto the inside track. He goes to ground. The financial picture takes another 6 months to reconstruct, and we're back to Maisie being at risk indefinitely. Evan said, so we need to let it play out. You need to let it play out with controls, Evan said. Use Kessler. He cooperates. You convert his credentials into a trap. Rourke sends the order. Kessler initiates through your controlled channel. You intercept the transfer and move on Rourke simultaneously. The silence on this other end of the phone was different this time. Deciding something silence, more like the specific something silence of a man who'd been working a problem for weeks and had just heard someone else say the answer out loud. That's a dangerous setup, Holt said. Yes, Evan said. If Kessler doesn't cooperate, he will, Evan said. He's not a hard man. He's a man who made a bad choice for what was probably a reason that felt reasonable at the time. And now he's in something he doesn't know how to get out of. Give him a way out and he'll take it. You sound certain of that. I'm not certain of anything. But people who take money from the wrong people generally don't do it because they're committed ideologically. They do it because they needed something, which means when the cost of what they did becomes real to them, most of them would rather cooperate than not. Holt breathed. I need to take this up the chain. Then take it up the chain today, Evan said, because if Rourke is feeling pressure to move, today might be the beginning of the window, not the middle of it. He hung up and stood on the porch for a moment. The yard needed mowing. He kept meaning to get to it. He had a job site in 3 hours, a crew waiting on a delivery of lumber that might or might not arrive on schedule, and a situation he'd told himself he would stay at the edges of, that kept pulling him toward its center. He went back inside. Sophie was rinsing her cereal bowl in the sink. Looked at him when he came in, looked at his face the way she always did when he came in from the porch during a phone call. "Construction stuff?" she said. "Yeah," he said. She dried her hands on the dish towel. She hung it back on the handle wrong, the way she always did, one corner folded in on itself. Maisie texted. "She wants to know if we can do the card game again Thursday." "Sure," he said. "Thursday works." Sophie nodded. She picked up her backpack. She stopped at the kitchen doorway. "Her mom's going to be okay, right?" He looked at his daughter. She was 9 years old and she'd been watching carefully, and she'd understood then he'd said. "We're working on it," he said. She considered this for a moment, the same way she'd considered the cold French fry, with a seriousness that was almost adult and was entirely her. And she said, "Okay," and went to catch the bus. He told Camille about Kessler himself. He hadn't planned to. He'd assumed Holt would do it, or that it would come through official channels in official language. But Camille called him that afternoon while he was on the job site, and she sounded like someone who had been holding something up for a long time and needed to set it down. "They told me about Martin," she said. "Holt's team came to the office an hour ago." "I'm sorry." A pause. He stepped away from the lumber delivery and stood behind his truck where the crew couldn't see his face. 4 years, she said. "He's been with me 4 years. Came to Maisie's birthday last year. He brought her a stuffed elephant." Her voice was controlled. Very controlled. The way voices get when the alternative is worse. She still has it. It's on her shelf. He didn't say anything. "You what he was helping them do," she said. Not a question. Saying it out loud, because saying it was different from knowing it. He knew they were trying to take her. "We don't know specifically what he knew," Evan said. "He knew he was helping someone access proprietary technology. Whether he understood what the larger operation involved." Camille said, "Quiet, not sharp. Just don't. Manage it for me. I'm not going to fall apart. I just need you to say it straight." He closed his eyes for a second. The October air smelled like sawdust and cold ground. "He made choices that put Maisie in danger," he said. Probably told himself he was just passing information, that no one would actually get hurt. People in his situation almost always tell themselves something like that. He paused. "Doesn't make it not true." She was quiet for a moment. "Holt says you came up with the plan. The controlled channel. Holt had the framework. I just suggested the shape of it." He said you suggested it, before he'd finished explaining the problem. Holt exaggerates. He really doesn't seem like the type. A pause that had a different quality than her previous pauses. Processing, observing. "You figured out there was an inside player before anyone identified Kessler. You figured out the financial decoy before the financial team did. You told Holt Rourke would move inside the window we had, and then 24 hours later, you were right." She stopped. "Do you understand why that makes me feel 2 things simultaneously that are difficult to reconcile?" "Safe and unsettled," he said. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." He looked at the job site. His crew chief was managing the lumber delivery competently and didn't need him, and the house frame was exactly where it should be. And somewhere inside that ordinary afternoon was a version of his life that had been simpler 2 weeks ago and was not going back to that. "Plan is solid," he said. "Kessler cooperates. We control the channel. Rourke moves when he's ready and walks into a trap. Holt's people do the actual work. I was just reading the pattern." "Just," she said, like the word didn't fit. "Camille." She said. "I know you're not trying to be modest. This is just how you process things." Another pause. "How do you do that?" "Just look at something complicated and see the shape of it." He thought about it. It was the most direct question anyone had asked him about himself in years, and it deserved something better than a deflection. "Spent a long time in situations where the pattern was the only thing that mattered," he said finally. "You learn to see it or you don't survive the not seeing." He stopped. "It's not a gift. It's just practice. A long time of very high-stakes practice. She was quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted, not softer exactly, but less armored. Martin is going to cooperate, she said. Not a question either. Deciding something. I think so, he said. Then we wait. Then we wait, he confirmed. A beat of quiet between them. The kind that in another circumstance might have been a different kind of moment, but in this one was just two people standing on opposite ends of a phone, managing what they could manage. Sophie set an extra place at dinner again. Last Tuesday, he said. He wasn't sure why he said it. It was just the thing that was true. He heard something in the silence that might have been Camille smiling. He couldn't verify that, but it had that sound. Maisie rearranged my kitchen drawer looking for the good scissors, Camille said. I didn't say anything because I couldn't think of a good reason the scissors placement matters. She said, that's the thing. It doesn't. He looked at the frame of the house, his crisp building the skeleton of it, exposed to the gray October sky, waiting to become something people would eventually live inside. Go home to your kid, he said. You too, she said. They hung up. So he stood behind his truck for another minute, and then he went back to work, because that was the other thing that was true. The house still needed framing, and the lumber had arrived, and his crew was waiting. And the ordinary world kept asking to be built, regardless of whatever else was happening. Picked up his hammer. He went back to work. Martin Kessler agreed to cooperate on a Wednesday morning. Holt called Evan at 6:48, which was earlier than their usual contact window, and told Evan everything he needed to know about how the conversation with Kessler had gone before meant. Holt said a single word about it. He folded in about 20 minutes, Holt said. Cried for a while. Then he talked. Evan was standing at the kitchen counter in yesterday's work shirt, waiting for coffee that hadn't finished brewing yet. Through the window, the backyard was gray and still, frost on the grass that would burn off by 9. What did he say? He says he didn't know about the kidnapping attempt. He says, and I want to be clear that I'm not vouching for this, it's what he told us that he believed he was passing technical specifications to a corporate competitor. An intellectual property theft arrangement, not a leverage operation involving a child. Do you believe him? A pause. Partially. I think he knew the people he was dealing with were not clean. I think he told himself the rest wasn't his problem. Holt's voice carried the specific flatness of a man who had sat across from a lot of people in rooms like that and had learned to hold what they said at a certain distance. He's 38 years old. He has a house he couldn't afford, a mother in assisted living, and a financial situation that got bad fast. I've seen the version of this before. So have I, Evan said. He's scared, genuinely scared, not performing it. Another pause. He said when he heard about the diner, the news covered it at an armed robbery, but apparently enough circulated internally at Westbrook that people understood what it actually was. He stopped sleeping. Evan thought about that. About a man in a house he couldn't quite afford, lying awake in the dark, understanding gradually what he'd put his hands into. He'll cooperate fully, full cooperation. Proffer agreement, federal protection, the whole arrangement. He gave us everything he has on the contact chain burner numbers, dead drop locations, the protocol they use for communication. No. And most importantly, Holt paused, and Evan could hear the shape of something significant in that pause. He told us how he'll send the order. When Rourke decides to move, Kessler will receive a specific phrase through a message board they use. A phrase about a weather forecast. Clear skies over Boston. Evan said nothing for a moment. The coffee finished. Poured a mug and held it in both hands. So now we wait for clear skies, he said. We wait. The waiting was 11 days. Evan had expected the waiting to be the hard part. He'd been in situations before where the waiting was its own kind of punishment, the operational pause before something moved, the hours that had a physical weight to them. He'd thought he remembered how to manage it. He'd forgotten that this version of waiting happened in a house with a 9-year-old daughter who needed breakfast and school clothes and help with a geography project on South American river systems. Turned out to be considerably better than the alternative. Sophie spread her project across the kitchen table on day 3 of the wait and occupied it entirely, reference books and colored pencils, and a hand-drawn map that was technically inaccurate in several places, but showed genuine effort. Amazon is the biggest, she said, not looking up from the map. The longest is the Nile. People mix that up. People do mix that up, Evan agreed. Do you know why that matters? She looked up. Her pencil was making the map's blue river slightly too wide. Why does it matter? Because biggest and longest aren't the same thing. And if you're standing at the edge of a river, what matters is how much of it there is around you, not how far it goes. She looked back at her map. My teacher says the Amazon has 20% of all the river water on Earth. Evan looked at his daughter. She was 9 years old and had just said something that was either about rivers or wasn't. And he wasn't entirely sure she knew which. That's a lot of water, he said. Yeah, she kept drawing. Maisie's coming over Saturday, right? If everything works out, he said. He said it carefully, the way he said everything carefully these days, parsing for what was true. Sophie looked up again. She had that reading him look. Is it almost over? He held her gaze. We're getting close. She went back to the map. I like Maisie, but I think she'd be easier to be friends with if she wasn't also a problem you're trying to solve. He didn't have an answer for that, because it was accurate enough that any response felt insufficient. On day 6, came to the house for the first time, not because of a drop-off or pickup, but because Holt had asked them both to be reachable in a short window, and Camille's office was 40 minutes from the federal facility, and Evan's house was 15. It was purely logistical. That was the frame they put on it. She sat at the kitchen table, where Sophie's geography project had been cleared to the counter, and Evan made coffee the way he always made it, which was too strong for most people. He set a mug in front of her, and she drank it without comment, which he noted. How are you holding up? He asked. She turned the mug in a slow circle. I'm functioning. That's the honest answer. She looked at the kitchen, took it in the way she sometimes did, like she was mapping it. The drawings on the refrigerator. Sophie's sneakers by the back door. A grocery list on the counter in Evan's handwriting, which was bad, and Sophie's handwriting, which was worse but enthusiastic. I keep thinking about Martin sitting at the desk across from his computer and doing what he did and then coming to Maisie's birthday. She stopped. I bought the wrong cake that year. I ordered chocolate, and Maisie wanted vanilla, and I didn't remember until we were cutting it. And Martin said, she's 7. She'll eat anything with frosting. And he was right, and Maisie ate 2 pieces and it was fine. She looked at the table. I keep thinking, at that moment when he said, that did he already know what he'd agreed to? Was he already in it by then? You can drive yourself into the ground with those questions, Evan said. Bet. She looked up. How do you not? He thought about this seriously. He didn't reach for the easy answer. You don't stop the questions. You just stop expecting them to arrive at a place that makes it feel okay. Because they won't. And waiting for them to do that keeps you stuck in it. She was quiet. She looked at the grocery list. You have more apples written 3 times on this list. Sophie keeps adding it. She has a thing about apples. Maisie has a thing about orange juice. She has opinions about pulp levels that she will explain at length if you ask her to. A small, involuntary smile. Kind that happens before the person decides whether they meant to. Specifically, she wants what she calls medium pulp, which is not a standard category. Absolutely is to her, completely non-negotiable. The smile lasted another second, then settled into something quieter. She's doing better than I expected. I thought after the diner she'd have nightmares for weeks. She might still. She might, Camille agreed. But right now she's more interested in your daughter's card game. She came home last Tuesday with a new rule. She'd invented something about a wild card that can reverse the direction of play, and she explained it to me very seriously at dinner. Sophie texted me about that rule. Apparently it was a point of significant negotiation. It sounds like them. Camille looked at her mug. How do you do this? The waiting. Badly, Evan said. Same as everyone. She looked at him. He looked back. The kitchen was quiet in that particular way. Houses are quiet in the middle of a weekday, a working stillness, not an empty one. You're not what I expected, she said, when I first understood what you were. What you'd been. She paused, choosing. I expected someone harder. Unkind, just more closed down, like the training had taken up all the available space. He thought about that. Maybe it did for a while. So fix that? Sophie required it, he said. There was a difference, and he thought she'd understand it. You can't be closed down with a 2-year-old. They won't let you. They need you to show up, in a way that he stopped, finding the words. She needed me to be present, not operational, not managing risk. Just there. He turned his own mug. I wasn't very good at it at first. I kept treating it like a mission. Schedule protocols, risk assessment for playgrounds. A pause. Sophie used to say, "Daddy, stop thinking so loud." Camille's expression did something quiet and real. She still does that? Occasionally, he said, when I've earned it. Call came on day 11. Holt rang at 2:17 in the afternoon. Evan was on a job site, up on the second-floor deck framing, and his phone buzzed in his shirt pocket, and he knew before he answered it. Clear skies over Boston, Holt said. Evan lowered the nail gun. Below him, his crew was working through lunch, the rhythmic sound of a job in motion. Kessler received it 18 minutes ago. Our tech team has the controlled channel active. Kessler is in a secure location with 2 agents. A pause. He's going to respond with a confirmation. Standard protocol in their communication. He initiates the transfer through our channel. And Rourke will be watching for confirmation of transfer completion. We're prepared for that. We have a spoofed confirmation system that will tell him the transfer completed. He'll receive what looks like a successful authentication code. Holt's voice had the focused compression of a man running something in real time and talking simultaneously. We have teams at the facility and 2 mobile units on Rourke's estate. The moment he acts on the confirmation, we move. How many people at the estate? We believe 4. Rourke has a personal security team, small 2-man rotation. We're expecting his technical director to be present, a man named Voss, who managed the communication architecture. And Rourke himself. And connected cells? Partner agencies are coordinating. 6 simultaneous locations. We go on my signal after Rourke is confirmed in custody. A pause that had a different texture. Sir, I wanted you to hear this directly. I know, Evan said. Your part is done. You stay home tonight. He looked at the half-framed wall in front of him. The exposed structure of a thing being built, all the bones visible before the skin goes on. I mean it, not because I don't trust you. Because it's right. This is federal work from here, and you've done your part, and you've done it well. Yeah, I'll be at home, Evan said. Make sure it's clean. That's the plan. He hung up. He put his phone in his pocket. He stood on the second-floor deck for a moment with his nail gun at his side and the October air moving through the exposed framing and his crew working below him, completely unaware that anything particular was happening. Then he climbed down and told his crew chief he was leaving early and drove home. Sophie got off the bus at 3:45. She came in through the front door with her backpack hanging off one shoulder the way she always wore it, slightly precarious, something he'd mentioned approximately 400 times. She dropped it by the door correctly this time, actually hung it on the hook he'd installed specifically so she'd stop leaving it on the floor and looked at him. He was at the kitchen counter. He'd been at the kitchen counter for 40 minutes doing nothing convincing. You're home early, she said. Job wrapped up. She accepted this at the standard discount rate she applied to his explanations and went to the kitchen for an apple, which she bit into standing at the counter next to him. She chewed. She looked at him sideways. Is tonight the night? She asked. He looked at her. What makes you ask that? You're standing at the counter, not doing anything. You only do that when you're waiting. She took another bite. Also, you cleaned the bathroom. You clean things when you're nervous. He had, in fact, cleaned the bathroom. He hadn't registered doing it as significant information. There's some things happening tonight, he said, with the people trying to help Maisie's situation. I think it's going to be okay, but I need you to stay close tonight. Sophie chewed, nodded. Are you going somewhere? No, he said. I'm staying here. She looked at him for a moment, that full inventory look. Yes, he'd intervened. Then she leaned against the counter next to him, and they stood there together in the kitchen. Outside the light was going amber gold the way it does in Massachusetts in October, like the whole season is trying to make a case for itself before it ends. Can we make pasta, she said. Yeah, he said. We can make pasta. So that was what they did. Sophie pulled the box from the cabinet and found the pot and filled it with water while Evan found the olive oil and the garlic and the things that make a sauce out of almost nothing. They worked around each other in the small kitchen the way they'd been doing it for years, the choreography of it requiring no discussion. She handed him the cutting board without being asked. He moved the pot to the back burner. Before she reached for the cabinet, it was blocking. He put water on to boil. His phone sat on the counter. 4:52 it buzzed. He turned it over. A text from Holt. Transfer confirmed. Team moving. He turned the phone face down. Everything okay, Sophie said. She was grating Parmesan. Sabine Saint-Fiends and... Yeah, he said. Everything's okay. He stirred the garlic in the pan and watched it carefully because garlic is one of those things that goes from right to wrong in about 30 seconds if you're not paying attention. At 5:14, Holt called. Evan stepped into the hallway. Rourke is in custody. Holt's voice was different than it had been at 2:17. Still controlled, but with something underneath it, the specific release of tension that comes after a thing has been prepared for a long time and has finally happened. We hit the estate at 5:08. He was at his monitoring station, watching the transfer confirmation come through. Voss was with him. Both in custody, no injuries on our side. Evan leaned against the hallway wall. The servers, he said. Seized. Full financial architecture, communication records, operational files for the last 18 months, including 3 European operations. This isn't circumstantial, it's comprehensive. Holt paused. The 6 coordinated locations. 2 of the connected cells had partial evacuations. We have people. Not all the people, but the command infrastructure is gone. The money is frozen. Rourke's network doesn't have the capacity to continue operating. It was quiet for a moment. Maisie said. She's safe, Holt said. Completely. This was the command operation. Without Rourke and the financial structure and the communications architecture, there is no continued threat. The remaining cells aren't loyal. They're contractual, and the contract is void. He stood in the hallway for another moment. The kitchen smelled like garlic and pasta, water, and his daughter was in there grating cheese and narrating something to herself, which was a thing she did when she thought no one was listening. Thank you, Evan said. Thank you, Holt said. And the way he said it wasn't a formality. Evan hung up. He stood in the hallway for one more moment. He looked at the wall. Sophie had taped a drawing there last month. A house with enormous windows and a very small figure out front that was either him or a tree. He'd never asked which. He looked at it for a second. Then he went back to the kitchen. Sophie looked up. She had Parmesan on her shirt. Good news, he said. She read his face. Her expression shifted not dramatically, just a loosening. Something held carefully for too long, gently released. It's over? It's over. She turned back to the cheese. She grated for a moment. Good, she said. Her voice was very calm and very young, and he loved her for both things simultaneously. The water's boiling. He looked at the pot. He salted it. He called Camille at 5:31. She answered on the second ring, which told him Holt had already reached her, or she'd been watching her phone, the same way he'd been standing at the kitchen counter. She said, first thing, before he could say anything. Holt called. I know he did, Evan said. I called anyway. Pause. A real one, not the calculating kind. Thank you. For that. He was in the backyard now, the screen door closed behind him. The October evening coming down cold and clear. The frost from this morning had never really left the shadows. How's Maisie? He said. She doesn't know. I haven't figured out how to tell her yet. How much of it? What words? A pause. She knows something was wrong. Kids always know something was wrong. But the level of what was wrong, I don't know how to scale that to 7. You don't have to tell her everything tonight, he said. You just have to tell her she's safe. That's what she'll hear. The rest she'll ask about when she's ready for it. Silence on the other end. A good silence. Are you going to be okay? He asked. I'm going to be. She stopped. Started again. I'm sitting in my car in the parking garage under my office. I've been sitting here for 22 minutes because I needed somewhere to be that wasn't professional and wasn't home yet. A small sound that might have been a laugh or its cousin. I cried for about 10 minutes, and then I stopped, and now I'm just sitting here. Seems like a reasonable response to the last 3 weeks. It feels embarrassing, she said. It's a parking garage. But he saw. You're hearing it. I won't tell anyone, he said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, a little rough around the edges, not her professional version. He hadn't heard that particular laugh before, and he found himself remembering the exact sound of it. I should go get her, Camille said. Yeah, he said. She'll want to see you, Evan. His name in her voice. Specific. Not a title or a function. What you did for Maisie, for me, all of it. I don't have a word for what the right acknowledgement of that is. Thank you doesn't... You don't need the word, he said. Pause. We're good, she agreed. He went back inside. Sophie had finished the pasta and was ladling it into bowls with the focused concentration she brought to anything she decided to do properly. She'd set 2 places at the table. Then she stopped, went back to the cabinet, and set a third. He looked at the third bowl. She'll probably want to come over, Sophie said, not looking up. Maisie, when her mom tells her, she'll want to be somewhere normal. She put a spoon next to the third bowl. Also, there's enough pasta. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking at his daughter, who was 9 years old and had set a third place at the table, because that's what you did when someone needed somewhere normal to be. When did you get so smart, he said. Sophie considered this. I think I've been pretty smart for a while. You're just noticing. He sat down at the table. She brought the bowls over and sat across from him, and they ate pasta in the small house that was quiet but not empty. And outside, the October dark came down, and the temperature dropped, and somewhere across the state, a federal operation was processing its paperwork, and Gideon Rourke was sitting in a room that was going to be his life for a long time. And Camille. Westbrook was driving out of a parking garage to go get her daughter. Evan ate his pasta. His jaw had healed well enough that he'd barely noticed it anymore. Stitches above his eye had come out 4 days ago, and the scar was small, a thin line that Tárez had said would fade. His knee had stopped complaining sometime around day 7 of the waiting. The body was practical about these things. It moved forward whether or not the rest of you was ready. Sophie said, Yeah. Do you think it'll be weird? After. When Maisie doesn't need to come over for the reason she's been coming over. She turned pasta around her fork. Will they still come? He thought about Camille in the parking garage. Maisie's purple sneakers on his hallway floor. About the card game with its impossible rules and the specific sound of 2 children laughing down a hall. I think that's up to us, he said. Sophie looked at him. And what do you think we should decide? He looked at the third bowl she'd set on the table. I think we should leave the door open, he said. Sophie nodded. She seemed satisfied with that. She went back to her pasta. Outside, the wind moved through the maple tree, and the house held against it, the way it had been built to, solid and specific, and the kitchen was warm and smelled like garlic, and something that wasn't quite a new beginning, but was at least an unlocked door. He finished his dinner. He didn't clean the bathroom again, because there was nothing left to be nervous about. For the first time in 11 days, and perhaps longer than that, Evan Mercer sat at his kitchen table after dinner and simply let the evening be quiet without listening to it for threats. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. Maisie did come over that night. Not immediately, it was almost 8 o'clock when Camille's headlights swept across the front window, later than Evan had expected. Sophie had already changed into pajamas, but was still at the kitchen table, pretending to read when the knock came at the door. Evan opened it and found Camille standing on the porch with Maisie in front of her, Maisie still in her school clothes, hair slightly unraveled from whatever it had been that morning, the yellow jacket zipped all the way up against the October cold. Maisie looked up at him. Her eyes were red around the edges, the particular redness that comes from crying that is finished, not crying that is ongoing. My mom told me, she said, about the bad men being caught. Yeah, Evan said they got them. Maisie considered this for a moment, with the solemn weight that 7-year-olds bring to serious information. Sophie said there was extra pasta. Okay, Maisie said, and walked inside. He looked at Camille over the top of Maisie's head. She looked like someone who had been through a very long day and had arrived, finally, somewhere she didn't have to perform anything. Her eyes were also red, less so than Maisie's, managed better the way adults manage these things, not necessarily more successfully. Come in, he said. We won't stay long, she said. Come in anyway, he said. She came in. Sophie appeared from the kitchen and took Maisie by the hand with the easy authority of someone who had decided a thing and was executing it, and towed her back toward her bedroom without preamble. Evan heard the door close, and then the low sound of Sophie's voice explaining something, probably the new card game rule, and Maisie responding. Whatever they said to each other in that room in the next 20 minutes was theirs, and no one else's, and that seemed exactly right. Evan reheated the extra pasta. Camille sat at the kitchen table and held a mug of coffee he put in front of her, and neither of them said much for a little while, which was its own kind of conversation. How did she take it? He asked eventually. When you told her? Looked at the table. She asked me if the bad men were going to come back. Told her no. She asked how I knew. I told her that the people who sent them had been caught and couldn't send anyone anymore. She paused. She thought about it for a moment, and then she said, Is Evan the one who helped? And I said yes, and she said, I knew it was him, like she'd been waiting to confirm something she'd already decided. Evan set the reheated pasta in front of her. Kids read more than we think they do. She said she knew at the diner, Camille said. When you knocked 3 times and then twice on the pantry door. She said Sophie's dad knocked like he promised, so I knew it was safe. She wrapped both hands around the mug. 3 weeks of this, and that's what she carries from it. That you knocked like you promised. He sat down across from her. What to say to that, so he didn't say anything, which was the right call. They ate eventually, the way people eat when they're tired, and the food is simple, and no one needs the meal to be anything more than what it is. The house was quiet around them, except for the sound from Sophie's room, and Camille ate all of it, which meant she hadn't eaten much today, which meant she'd been running on something other than food, which he understood completely. She left at 9:30. Maisie had fallen asleep on Sophie's floor in the middle of the card game, still in her school clothes, yellow jacket used as a blanket, which Sophie reported with the specific mix of triumph and tenderness that children deploy when a younger kid has trusted them enough to fall asleep in their space. Carried her to the car. Evan held the door. He watched the taillights disappear down the street, stood on the porch for a moment in the cold. Then he went back inside and told Sophie it was time for bed, and Sophie said she wasn't tired, and he said that wasn't the question, and she went. The formal closing of the case, as Holt explained it, happened in stages. The federal arraignment for Gideon Rourke took place 10 days after his arrest. Evan didn't attend. He read about it in a brief text from Holt that said formal charges filed, pretrial detention confirmed. Bail, and then he sees Mains, and he set his phone down and went back to work on a retaining wall that needed his attention more than the legal system needed his observation. Rourke was 61 years old and facing charges that would very likely take the rest of his functional life. And Evan tried to find something clean in that justice. Resolution, the satisfying click of a door closing, and found instead something more complicated. What Rourke had built over 4 years, out of a grudge that had calcified into something monstrous, had touched in a 7-year-old girl who still slept with a stuffed elephant given to her by the man who'd helped target her. Charges were real, and the consequences were real, and Rourke deserved every single one of them. And none of that undid the fact that the stuffed elephant was still on Maisie's shelf and would require a separate conversation that Camille had mentioned briefly. And Evan had not asked about further, because it wasn't his territory. Martin Kessler entered federal protective custody and began what Holt described as extensive cooperation. Proffer agreement held. Evan thought about Kessler, sometimes Not often, not with sympathy exactly, but with the particular understanding that comes from knowing how people make the first choice that leads them somewhere they never intended to go. Kessler had needed money and made a calculation and been wrong about every element of it. That wasn't forgiveness. It was just the shape of how it happened. Voss, Rourke's technical director, was less cooperative, and his attorneys were more aggressive, which Holt said was expected and manageable. The 4 connected cells that had been successfully raided were being processed through the appropriate jurisdictions, some domestic and some involving international coordination that Holt declined to specify. 2 that had partially evacuated remained a thread to be followed. Without the command structure and the financial network they were, in Holt's words, a diminished and disorganized problem rather than an active threat. Holt came to the house one last time in early November on a Tuesday evening when the first real colds had settled in and showed no signs of leaving. He sat at the kitchen table. Evan's kitchen table had hosted several federal briefings at this point and seemed no worse for it, and he had a folder, and he also had, somewhat unexpectedly, 2 cups of coffee from a place in town, which he set on the table when he arrived. "Peace offering," he said of the coffee. "You don't owe me anything," Evan said. He sat down. He opened the folder. He walked Evan through the final case status with the systematic thoroughness of a man who had promised himself he'd close every loop. When he was done, he closed the folder. Then he just sat there for a moment, which was unusual for Holt, who was not a man who sat in silences voluntarily. "I've been doing this for 19 years, Holt said. "I've worked with a lot of people, formal consultants, informal assets, people who knew things we needed to know." He looked at his coffee cup. "You see differently than anyone I've worked with. Financial decoy, the inside access prediction, the controller at the diner, you see the structure of a thing, while everyone else is still looking at the surface of it." "You would have gotten there," Evan said. "Maybe, probably, on a longer timeline." Holt looked up. "I want to say something, and I want you to hear it as what it is, which is a statement of fact and not a recruitment pitch." Evan waited. "What you did here mattered. Not just the diner, though, that too, but the weeks after. The analysis, the pattern reading, the prediction that let us set up the trap correctly." He paused. "You think that part of yourself is something you buried or something you contain. I think you've misidentified it. It's not a weapon. It's just how you think." Evan was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle, the same way Camille sometimes did, and caught himself doing it and stopped. "What it cost," he said finally. "That way of thinking. What it cost me and what it cost the people around me." He looked at Holt. "It's not something I misidentified. I understand what it is. I just needed it to take up less space." Holt nodded. He accepted that, without argument, which Evan respected. "Fair. It doesn't take up less space when I'm using it," Evan said. "That's the problem. Is it still a problem now?" Evan thought about Sophie's geography project, about the pasta and the third bowl and the sound of children in the hallway. Akeen, about standing at the kitchen counter waiting for a phone call and his daughter identifying it immediately because she knew exactly what his nervous stillness looked like. "I need to make sure it is," he said, "for Sophie. That I'm her father first and the other thing second, not the other way." "You are," Holt said simply. Evan looked at him. "I've been in this house several times," Holt said. "I've seen how she talks to you, the way she reads you, yes, but also the way she trusts you. Kids with parents who lead with the other thing don't look like that." He picked up his coffee. "You got it in the right order. I just thought someone should say it to you directly, since you seem unlikely to arrive at it on your own." He left 20 minutes later, and Evan stood in the doorway watching him drive away and thought about the specific way 19 years of federal work shaped a person, made them precise in a certain way, observant, economical with what they said and why. Then he went back inside because it was cold. 3 weeks after that, Camille called on a Saturday morning. Sophie was at the table, eating cereal and reading something on her tablet, the particular absorbed stillness of a child deep in a story. Evan was making coffee and not thinking about much, which had become increasingly possible in the last few weeks. and which he was deliberately not examining too closely in case the examination itself disrupted it. "Coming over," Camille said. No preamble. Maisie wants to try making macarons. Evan processed this macarons. Yes, those are complicated. Maisie does not accept that as a relevant argument, Camille said. She saw them in a video and has decided they're the next thing. Told her they require precise measurements and multiple steps, and she said, "So does the card game." Evan looked at Sophie, who was oblivious. "Does she know what she's in for?" "Probably not," Camille said, "but neither does she particularly care." A pause. "Thought we could try. The girls make the macarons. They fail catastrophically or accidentally succeed. Everyone eats whatever comes out of the oven." Ordinary Saturday. He thought about his kitchen, about the specific project that ordinary Saturday would be, and how the kitchen would look afterward, and the noise level, the flour situation. "What time?" he said. 11? "I'll get eggs," he said. He hung up and looked at Sophie. "Maisie and her mom are coming over." Sophie looked up from her tablet. "What are we doing?" "Macarons, apparently." Sophie's expression moved through several phases. "Those are hard to make." "I know. Maisie's going to be very committed to them." "I know that too." Sophie looked back at her tablet and then put it down, which meant she'd decided the macarons were more interesting. "We're going to need almond flour," she said, with the authority of someone who had watched exactly enough cooking videos to have opinions about this. "Regular flour won't work. I'll get almond flour," he said. "And powdered sugar. A lot of it." He added it to his list. The list was on the counter, in the same place he always kept it, and Sophie's handwriting was at the bottom. She'd added more apples again, for the fourth time, which made him smile, in a way he didn't bother to suppress because no one was watching. He went to the grocery store and got eggs, and almond flour and powdered sugar, and also croffles, and he drove home through the November morning with the heat on in the truck and the radio on low, and something about the ordinary persistence of a Saturday. The grocery bags in the seat beside him, the familiar roads, the predictable cold felt like something he'd almost let go of and was now holding again more carefully. They arrived at 11:04. Maisie was through the door before Camille had finished parking, which had become her standard approach to arriving at Evans's. No, that he hadn't a kind of proprietary ease that he hadn't sought and hadn't discouraged. She was wearing the yellow jacket still. It was getting small on her, the sleeves riding up her wrists, and she had a folded piece of paper in her hand that turned out to be a printed macaron recipe she had annotated in purple marker. "I made notes," she told Sophie, handing over the paper with the gravity of a contractor, presenting a revised blueprint. Sophie examined the notes. "You changed step 4. "Step 4 is wrong," Maisie said. "I watched 6 videos. Step 4 is always wrong." Sophie considered this. "Okay," she said, "we used your step 4. Camille came in behind Maisie and stood in the hallway and watched her daughter's back disappear into the kitchen, and then looked at Evan with an expression that was both put and something warmer than tired. Particular expression of a parent watching their child be fully, confidently themselves. "She's been planning this since Thursday," Camille said. "I believe it," he said. They went into the kitchen. Followed was the better part of 2 hours that Evan would not have been able to accurately predict if he had tried, and he had a fairly good predictive record. Maisie's annotated step 4 turned out to be partially correct and partially disastrous. The almond flour needed sifting, which no one had mentioned in the 6 videos, and the first batch of batter was too thin, spread into shapeless rounds on the baking sheet that Sophie described generously as an impressionist interpretation. Maisie was briefly devastated by these and then recovered and decided they were simply the practice batch and the second batch would be correct. The second batch was better. Not good, technically. The shells were lopsided and several cracked, and the little ruffled edges that signal a properly made macaron were inconsistent at best and absent at worst. They held their shape roughly, and went into the oven looking like something that intended to be macarons, and when they came out, they still looked like that. Maisie pressed 2 together. "Yep, with the filling of buttercream that she and Sophie had made with intense mutual consultation and approximately twice the recommended amount of vanilla. They held together and looked, from a forgiving angle, like something a person might choose to eat. Hidden troned, the and furf on every surface that flour could have reached, and several it shouldn't have been able to. There was buttercream on the cabinet door handle. Sophie had a streak of powdered sugar on her forehead that she was unaware of. Maisie's jacket had been sacrificed early on and now hung over a kitchen chair, its yellow slightly compromised by a smear of almond flour along the left sleeve. Camille had started out trying to supervise and had gradually, over the course of the first hour, been informed by both girls that she was more helpful if she wasn't actively involved in the process, and had retreated to the kitchen counter with her coffee and watched. Evan was beside her. They stood at the counter, quite shoulder to shoulder, both holding coffee, watched two girls who had met in a locked pantry during one of the worst nights of both their young lives rain cracked. Imperfect macarons on a plate with the absolute seriousness of people who had created something worth presenting. "They're not going to taste good," Camille said quietly. "Probably not," he agreed. Maisie used a lot of vanilla. She measures vanilla, the way she plays the card game. Rules or suggestions. He smiled at that. He didn't try to do anything about it. Maisie picked up the plate and carried it to the table with both hands, the solemn care of someone transferring something fragile and important, and set it down. "You have to try them," she told the room at large. They each took one. Evan bit into his. It was dense and sweet and slightly gummy in the middle, and the vanilla hit hard enough to be memorable, and the cookie part was a little chewy where it should have been crisp, and it was genuinely one of the more imperfect things he'd eaten in recent memory. He finished it. "Good," he said. Maisie looked at him with the penetrating, evaluative gaze of someone who was going to have a very strong opinion about being managed. "Be honest." He looked at the small 7-year-old across his kitchen table. She had almond flour on her nose and buttercream on her thumb, and the absolute moral authority of someone who had made a thing with her hands and wanted a straight answer about it. "They're too sweet," he said. "The inside is a little undercooked. That outside needed another minute." He looked at her. "And they might be the best thing that happened in this kitchen in 6 years." Maisie stared at him. Then she looked at Sophie. Then she looked at her macaron. "We'll make them better next time," she said. Like next time was not a question at all. Like next time was simply the next appointment, in a calendar she'd already made. Sophie took a second macaron. "I think we needed more egg whites," she said thoughtfully. "The ratio was off." "I told you the ratio was off," Maisie said. "You said step 4 was off." "Step 4 is about folding. Step 4 and the ratio are connected." That's Sophie stopped. "Reconsidered. Okay, maybe." Evan looked at Camille. She was looking at her daughter. Her expression had the quality of something enormous, made quiet the way a strong wind sounds when you're inside and the windows are closed, present and real, but held at a certain remove. Her eyes were bright in a way she wasn't trying to manage. He looked away, because some things deserve their privacy. After the girls had migrated to Sophie's room with their imperfect macarons and the card game, and whatever argument would inevitably arise from combining them, Evan washed dishes, and Camille dried them. It was not a plan they'd made. It was simply happened when the sink was full, and two people were standing in a kitchens. Yes, he'd contravened. It was quiet in the comfortable way that quiet gets between people who have been through something together and don't need to cover the silence with noise. "I've been thinking," Camille said, setting a bowl in the cabinet, "what you said to Holt. About needing the other part of yourself to take up less space." He handed her the pasta pot. "When did Holt tell you that?" "He didn't. I'm making an educated inference based on knowing both of you." She put the pot away. "Think you got it wrong. Not about needing space for Sophie, that's right. That's obviously right. But the framing." She accepted the next dish. "You talk about it like it's a competing thing. Like the man who can read a financial diagram in 30 seconds and figure out there's a 9th person in a parking is a different man from the one who made pasta and knocked 3 times, and then twice." She looked at him. "He's not. You know that, right?" He kept washing. I know it now better than I did. Sophie's never seen two different people. She's just seen her father. She dried a mug. And for what it's worth, from someone who spent the last 3 weeks watching you be both things simultaneously, so neither one of them is as frightening as you think they are. He handed her the last mug. The diner was frightening. The diner was necessary, she said. There's a difference. She put the mug in the cabinet and folded the dish towel wrong, one corner folded in on itself, and hung it on the handle exactly the way Sophie always did. She didn't seem to notice she'd done it. What frightened me, when I finally understood what you were, wasn't the capability. It was the idea that you'd decided to put walls around it. That something that useful, that essentially you, was something you were managing like a liability. He looked at the folded dish towel. It caused a lot of damage, she said, carefully, not dismissing it. I'm not saying it didn't. I'm saying the damage wasn't the thing itself. She paused. The damage was circumstance. The capability is just yours. Didn't answer right away. He leaned against the counter and looked at the flour residue he'd missed on the backsplash, plate of imperfect macarons on the table, Sophie's grocery list with its 4 iterations of more apples, the dish towel hung wrong. My wife said something similar, he said. Once. He hadn't said her name in so long that the habit of not saying it had become its own kind of wall. Sarah. She said I treated my own mind like a problem I was solving. He stopped. She wasn't wrong. Camille was quiet, respectful, quiet. She would have liked Sophie's card game, he said. The made-up rules. She had a thing about games that rewarded lateral thinking over memorized strategy. He looked at the table. She would have found Maisie's annotation deeply satisfying. She sounds like she was very smart, Camille said. Smarter than me, he said, in the ways that mattered more. Quiet. The kind that holds something important without needing to label it. Not trying to replace anything, Camille said carefully. I want to say that clearly. This isn't me saying that. He said, that's not what I heard. She looked at him. What did you hear? He thought about it, honestly not reaching for the answer that was easiest. I heard someone telling me that the door I've been guarding so carefully might not need as many locks as I put on it. Her expression shifted. The professional armor she wore, very naturally, the composed capability that was genuinely part of who she was and not a performance of it, softened at the edges without disappearing. Which was the right amount. That's a good way to hear it, she said. Down the hall, something happened in Sophie's room that produced a loud disagreement about the card game, followed by a negotiation, followed by laughter. Maisie's voice rose above Sophie's in a way that suggested she had won on points, and Sophie's responding laugh had the particular quality of someone who had lost an argument and found it funny. Evan pushed off the counter. Stay for dinner, he said. It wasn't a tentative offer. He didn't frame it as a suggestion, or qualify it with if you want, or only if you don't have plans. He'd spent a long time being careful about what he extended, and to whom, and the carefulness had served its purpose, and he was done with it now. Camille said, like it was simple, because it was. He got out the pasta, because he knew how to make it, and it was enough, and he was done with evenings that tried to be more than enough. He filled the pot with water and set it on the stove and turned the heat on. The burner clicked 3 times before it caught. It always did. A small mechanical imperfection he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years and kept not fixing. The water began its slow move toward boiling. Camille found the plates and set 4 of them on the table without being told where they were, because she'd been in this kitchen enough times to know. 4 places. The right number, which was a number that had changed, and the change was not something that needed to be managed or examined or approached carefully. It was just 4 plates on a table. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, with Maisie behind her. Maisie's macaron plate now missing 3 more cookies, and both of them looking like people who had reached an accord. Is dinner happening? Dinner is happening, Evan said. Pasta, Sophie said. Pasta, he confirmed. Told you, Sophie said to Maisie. I wasn't arguing, Maisie said. You were going to, Sophie said. Maisie considered this. Maybe, she allowed. They came into the kitchen and found position Sophie at the counter asking if she could stir the sauce, Maisie at the table examining the plate of leftover macarons with an evaluative eye, Camille near the window, holding her coffee in both hands and watching the backyard where the November dark had come down and the maple tree was bare and the frost was already forming on the grass. It was not a picture-perfect scene. The kitchen still had flour residue on the backsplash that Evan had missed. The dish towel was hung wrong. Sophie was going to overstir the sauce, and he was going to have to gently take the spoon away before she did it a fourth time. Maisie was going to have a very detailed opinion about what the macarons needed to be better, and Sophie was going to have a competing opinion, and the discussion was going to go on longer than strictly necessary. None of it was neat. None of it was what he'd planned 6 years ago when he'd built a quiet life around a wall and called it protection. It was the four of them in a kitchen on a November Saturday, and the pasta water was beginning to steam, and somewhere outside the bare maple was holding still in the cold, and Evan Mercer was not listening for threats. He was just making dinner. For a long time, he had believed that peace meant keeping the world outside. He'd built walls and called them wisdom, locked doors and called them love, and in some ways he hadn't been entirely wrong. Sophie needed the steadiness, the predictability, the father who was present, and not the one who was always waiting for something to go wrong. But the walls had stayed up past their purpose. The locks had become habit. And habit, he understood now, was just fear that had learned to look like discipline. The world he'd kept outside hadn't been a threat to Sophie. It had been flour on a jacket and a card game with invented rules and a 7-year-old who knocked 3 times and then twice and then walked out of a locked pantry holding his daughter's hand. He added the pasta to the water. Camille turned from the window and their eyes met across the kitchen, and she smiled, not the composed professional version, not the carefully managed version, but the rough-edged one he'd first heard in a parking garage, and he thought about what it meant that she was standing in his kitchen at the end of a November Saturday, as though it was somewhere she'd always been going. He didn't analyze it, he let it be what it was. Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Can I add the garlic now?" "Yes," he said, but gently. "I'm always gentle. You're enthusiastic," he said. "There's a difference." Maisie looked up from the macarons. "Sophie is not always gentle with the card game. The card game is different," Sophie said with dignity. "Card game is competitive. So is garlic, apparently." Camille said. Maisie laughed, and Sophie looked offended for approximately 1 second before she also laughed. And the kitchen was loud in the way kitchens should be loud. And Evan stood at the stove and let it be loud, and did not, for the first time in 6 years, wish for it to be quiet instead. Spent 6 years believing peace meant keeping the world outside. With imperfect macarons on the table, and flour on the backsplash, and 2 children arguing about garlic levels, and a woman standing in his kitchen, who had looked at every complicated thing he was and stayed anyway, he understood it differently. Peace was not the absence of people. Peace was having people worth opening the door for. He turned the heat up slightly under the sauce. Behind him, the 4 plates waited on the table. And this time, Evan Mercer left the door open.